Pasteurization. In the 1860s, a French chemist named Louis Pasteur proved that the invisible things making people sick were living microbes and that gentle heat could kill them. The method is almost embarrassingly plain. You warm milk, wine, or juice to a set temperature for a set time, and the bacteria that cause tuberculosis, typhoid, and childhood diarrhea die before they ever reach your body. Before this, a glass of raw milk was one of the most dangerous things a child could drink. In the growing industrial cities, milk traveled for days before it reached a table, and it carried the pathogens that killed infants by the thousands. Pasteur's discovery did something bigger than clean up the milk supply. It gave humanity the germ theory of disease, the single idea that everything else in modern medicine is built on. Once people understood that specific microbes cause specific illnesses, they could finally fight back instead of blaming bad air or bad luck. The smallpox vaccine. Smallpox is the only human disease ever wiped completely off the face of the earth, and it did not go quietly. In the 20th century alone, it killed an estimated 300 million people, more than every war of that century combined. It had stalked humanity for at least 3,000 years, scarring, blinding, and killing kings and peasants alike. The turning point came in 1796 when an English doctor named Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who caught mild cowpox never got smallpox. He tested the idea by deliberately exposing a boy to cowpox, then to smallpox. The boy never got sick. That was the first vaccine. It took nearly 2 centuries of effort, but in 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated, the first and still only time humanity has ever driven a disease to extinction on purpose. Water chlorination. You will never think about this one, and it may have saved more lives than anything else here. For most of history, the water in a city could kill you. Cholera and typhoid, spread through water contaminated with human waste, emptied entire towns and killed indiscriminately. In the 1850s, London suffered cholera outbreaks so severe that the River Thames became a river of death. Then, around the turn of the 20th century, cities began adding tiny amounts of chlorine to their drinking water. Typhoid, which had killed thousands every year, all but vanished from treated cities within a decade. Waterborne disease, once one of the leading killers of humankind, was quietly strangled at the tap. Chlorination is credited as a major reason human life expectancy climbed so dramatically in the 20th century. It is invisible, it is cheap, and it saves millions of lives every single year. Antibiotics. In 1928, a Scottish scientist named Alexander Fleming came back from holiday to find mold growing in a forgotten petri dish, and around that mold, the bacteria had died. That accident became penicillin, the first true antibiotic. To understand what this meant, you have to understand the world before it. In 1900, infectious disease caused roughly a third of all deaths. A scratch from a rose thorn, a scraped knee, a routine childbirth, or a simple sore throat could turn septic and kill you within days. And the best doctors in the world could only stand at the bedside and wait to see if you lived. Soldiers died more often from infected wounds than from the wounds themselves. When penicillin reached mass production in the 1940s, that entire terror simply lifted. Infections that had been death sentences for all of human history became a few days of pills. It remains one of the sharpest turning points in the story of human survival. The Green Revolution. In the 1960s, much of the world was staring down mass famine. Populations were exploding, and experts openly predicted that hundreds of millions of people in Asia and Africa were going to starve, and that nothing could stop it. One agronomist refused to accept that. Norman Borlaug spent years in the fields of Mexico breeding a new kind of wheat, short and sturdy with an enormous yield, resistant to the diseases that wiped out ordinary crops. When his dwarf wheat was introduced to India and Pakistan in the mid-60s, harvests jumped by more than half, and countries that had been begging for food aid became self-sufficient in a few short years. Borlaug won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he is credited with saving as many as 1 billion people from starvation, more than anyone else in history. Refrigeration. Picture a mother in summer with no way to keep milk from souring by nightfall and a baby who has to drink it anyway. That was ordinary life. Food spoiled within days, and spoiled food carried the bacteria that killed. A single failed harvest or a rotted shipment could tip a whole region into famine. Mechanical refrigeration changed the fundamental math of survival. It let food be stored for months instead of days, moved across oceans without rotting, and stockpiled against bad years. It slashed food poisoning and let people eat fresh meat, produce, and dairy year-round, improving nutrition for billions. But refrigeration quietly saved lives in another way too. It created the cold chain, the unbroken line of refrigeration that keeps vaccines and medicines viable from the factory all the way to a clinic in a remote village. Without that cold chain, most modern vaccines would spoil long before they ever reach the children who need them. Sanitation and sewers. For most of human history, cities were death traps, and the reason was simple. People lived surrounded by their own waste. Human sewage ran through the streets and seeped into the wells and rivers people drank from, breeding cholera, typhoid, and dysentery that killed on a massive scale. The Great Breakthrough was not a medicine but a system. In the 1800s, after outbreaks made cities nearly unlivable, engineers built the first modern sewer networks, physically separating human waste from drinking water. It is the least glamorous idea imaginable, and it worked. Deaths from waterborne disease collapsed wherever proper sewers were built. When doctors are polled on the greatest medical advance of the modern age, sanitation routinely beats the drugs everyone actually remembers. The simple act of carrying waste safely away from where people live has saved more lives than almost any pill ever invented. Oral rehydration therapy. The most powerful medicine on this list is salt, sugar, and clean water. For most of history, diseases like cholera killed by draining the body of fluid until the organs shut down, and it was children who died first, by the millions, every year, thirsty in their mother's arms while nothing could be done. Doctors long assumed the only way to save them was expensive intravenous fluid, unavailable across most of the world. Then researchers discovered something remarkable. A precise mixture of sugar, salt, and water, taken by mouth, lets the gut absorb fluid fast enough to keep a dying child alive. It costs pennies. It needs no hospital, no needle, no electricity. Since coming into wide use in the 1970s, oral rehydration therapy is estimated to have saved tens of millions of children, one simple cup of water at a time. Anesthesia and antiseptic surgery. 200 years ago, surgery was a form of torture that usually ended in death. Patients were held down, fully awake, screaming, while surgeons cut and sawed as fast as they possibly could. Even if you survived the pain, the wound almost always became infected and killed you anyway. Two inventions changed everything. First came anesthesia in the 1840s, which let patients sleep painlessly through operations that had once been unthinkable. Then came antiseptic technique, pioneered by Joseph Lister, who realized that invisible germs were what turned surgery deadly and began sterilizing his instruments and hands. Together, these turned surgery from a last desperate gamble into something survivable and precise. Every operation performed today, from a routine appendix removal to open-heart surgery, exists only because of these two breakthroughs that finally made cutting into the human body safe. Insulin. For thousands of years, a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was a quiet death sentence, and it fell hardest on children. Their bodies could no longer use the sugar in their blood, so they slowly starved no matter how much they ate, wasting away to skin and bone. The only treatment was to put them on near-starvation diets that bought a few extra months of misery. Then, in 1921, two Canadians, Frederick Banting and Charles Best, isolated the hormone the diabetic body was missing. They called it insulin. In January of 1922, they gave it to a 14-year-old boy named Leonard Thompson, who had wasted to 65 pounds and was slipping into a fatal coma. Within days, he came back to life. Doctors moved through whole wards of dying children, injecting them one by one, and watched kids wake from their comas before they reached the end of the row. One witness called it close to resurrection. Banting and Best sold the patent for $1 so that no child would ever be priced out of living. The Haber-Bosch process. This is the invention that feeds the world, and it is the reason many of the people watching this are alive at all. Roughly half the nitrogen in your body, in your muscles, your skin, your DNA, came from a single chemical process invented just over a century ago. Plants need nitrogen to grow, but for all of history, farms could only pull it slowly from nature, which strictly limited how much food the planet could produce. By the early 1900s, scientists warned that the world was about to hit a wall, and mass starvation loomed. Then two German chemists, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, found a way to pull nitrogen straight out of the air and turn it into fertilizer in effectively unlimited amounts. Today, synthetic fertilizer feeds roughly half of all humans alive, close to 4 billion people. Without it, billions of us would simply never have been born.